I know I've said this before, but some things bear repetition many times, as most of us have learned, since we forget even the most important things. I would suggest that we begin the day with, I choose to be loving. I choose to be loving because, and then answer that question. You can find, there's an entire blog called I Choose to Be Loving Because. You can find it in the Master Index, probably under, I didn't look it up, but knowing how I index things, loving, choice, or loving because. What would it be like, you ask yourself before any interaction with anybody, what would it be like if I were loving? And how would that change the world around me? Do I want to add love to this situation or fear? Anger is the fuel of every conflict, while love is the seed of joy. So, do I add fuel to the fire or do I plant the seeds of life? Those are the repetitive things that are worth saying, like children do their times tables when they're in whatever grade that is that they start that. I don't remember. Let's start off by talking about Anne and her partner, Lauren, who've been doing real love for many years. In the beginning, their chances of success looked bleak, actually. Lauren had severe PCSD and PTSD, and Anne was a complete control freak. So you can imagine how that went. Here's Anne controlling somebody who has severe PCSD and PTSD because she was controlled. So they fought and controlled, and there was running, and it was just constant. So Anne writes, I have written you many letters in my head, but they never made it to you. Words fail to describe the change in my life with real love. Lauren is unrecognizable from the woman you first met. She's happy and self-aware. I mean, unbelievable. This is the lady who had severe PCSD and PTSD and reacted badly to air. And here she is, happy and self-aware. That's the power of feeling love and giving it to other people. I've said it many times. I'm saying it again. If you keep at it, if you keep doing it, if you keep feeling loved, if you keep immersing yourself in the principles of love, your life can change from anything. This lady's just one of thousands I've known whose lives have changed. Anne continues, I rarely point out in any way how her behavior is hurting her. That's amazing since Anne's a control freak. She says, she takes a while, but she gets it herself without me saying anything. Sometimes the words that come out of her mouth amaze me. Her relationship with her family has blossomed. Occasionally I can give Lauren maybe a different perspective of a situation that is other than just a reaction to her childhood pain. In other words, if she asks, sometimes I can say, well, that's just PCSD and you don't have to react like you did when you were a kid. And she listens and gets it. It's a beautiful thing. She got a dog to practice loving the dog. And at first she expressed more love and affection to the dog than to me. And I admit, I bristled inside. I wanted to control it. I wanted to tell her to pay more attention to me than to the dog, which seems to make sense since they're partners. But I remembered where I got with controlling, and I left it alone. And she keeps getting more loving toward the dogs and now toward me. Listen to yourself, kid. You are as much a miracle as your partner. In the past, you would have meticulously, vastly over-controlled all this. you would have ruined it. But you're not now. Amazing. Just like you have said to your partner, you're feeling afraid because of PTSD. You're not out of control anymore. You're not being attacked and hurt anymore as you were when you were a child. Well, you're doing the same thing. You were hurt, which is why you became a controller. That was then. This is now, and you've changed. You conclude with, life is good. Yeah, life can be amazing when we see our choices and when we have enough love to make them. You are amazing. An amazing living example of what happens when people embrace loving. New subject. My daughter, Zoe, is 4. This is from Zoe's mother. And a girl at school told her, "You're not the boss of anyone." And Zoe complained when she came home that the girl was being mean to her. But I've talked to the teachers, and from watching Zoe lately, she's been getting very bossy. Now, all of you parents, pay attention, because here's a kid coming home and saying, somebody at school treated me badly, and many parents say, well, I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to call the kid's parents or see the principal, or let's have a principal teacher parent conference, which the teachers just really hate when they do it over every little thing. No, this parent has been paying attention because she's been noticing that her child's been bossy. So no wonder another kid says, "You're not the boss of anybody." You continue. Every time I try to talk to her about this, she insists that she was just giving them options. This is a 4-year-old. I'm just giving them options. Guess where she heard that? From her mother, who was teaching her. But see, a 4-year-old just giving people options without expectations is pretty unlikely. This is mom still talking. How do I help her see that sometimes she's wrong too? You can tell her, I'm not telling you what to do, but you said, what can I, how do I help her? You could tell her that you believe it when she says that she's not trying to be bossy. I believe it too. Most people who are bossy, controlling, afraid, whatever it is, aren't trying to be. It's just a reaction. Zoe needs to be heard before she can hear what you say. And that's what you're doing when you say, I believe you, that you're not trying to be bossy. You're listening to her. Beautiful. Then you tell her that most people are very sensitive to being told what to do, and even very sensitive to being given options. And explain it to her. She'll understand this if she can come up with the phrase, I'm just giving them options. Explain to her that at home, most kids are told what to do 19 times out of 20. Do this, do this, do this, do this, all day long. Brush your teeth, get out of bed, eat this, pull your chair, get in your chair, get off your chair. 19 out of 20 times kids are told what to do. And then 1 out of 20 times they're told, would you like this or this? So they're given an option 1 out of 20 times. It doesn't feel much like an option when a kid is constantly told what to do. So you explain that to her. You explain that people tend to hear options as criticism. And they hear it that something's wrong with them. That might not be her fault, but she does have to consider it in dealing with human beings. You're teaching her a lesson in life here, the kind of lessons that none of us got. I mean, whoever sat down with us and said, here's how human beings are, here's how they react to things, and here's how they would react better to things. I do not recall getting such a lesson, and so far I haven't run into anybody who got such lessons. It's more important to consider other people's feelings in most situations than it is to hear her options. So, in other words, it's important for Zoe to just think about their feelings before she gives them an option that she thinks is better. Unless somebody asks for an option, they've hit an obvious obstacle and they look consternated and they're having a little fit because they can't see an option. Yeah, they probably wouldn't appreciate hearing one. This is of an important life lesson for her. Second email from mom. She explains that explaining these things to Zoe doesn't work because she's tried it with her when she's been interacting with her little sister. And she denies that she's controlling with her sister Eve. So a suggestion, an option. When she's with Eve and she goes to control Eve, stop the conversation with Eve immediately, like in the second. Children tend to deny their controlling because we are very, let's call it, creative and liberal and forgiving with our memories. When we go back to remember a thing, we were kind of divine, We just did everything right. And everybody around us needed our glorious help. But right while she's controlling Eve, if you stop her, then you reteach the lesson. If she fights, you tell her to go think about it somewhere, her room, down the hall, whatever. Think about whether what she just said to Eve was controlling. And then come back so you can talk about it again. Mom says, it worked. When I stopped her right in the middle of controlling, she couldn't say, I'm not doing it, because she's a pretty smart kid. She could see that she was controlling, and then she could begin to see how some of the things that she did at school were controlling. These are the critical lessons that kids need that they're not getting. It's a delicate thing to encourage children to speak up about what they want, but also teach them that they can't always get what they want. So we encourage them to be creative. We encourage them to ask, but the answer can't always be yes, or they just end up being spoiled, rotten, and entitled, as an increasing number of kids are doing. There are now books coming out describing the generation coming up that has never been without their phones, smartphones. And they expect to get whatever they want whenever they want it. A new phone comes out, poof, it's immediately sold out because the parents had to buy it for kids who demanded it. They couldn't possibly be a generation of phone behind their friends. Are you kidding me? Be like them showing up wearing a farmer's blue jeans at school. No. And they can't impose what they want on other people. This way, the kids who don't learn this end up being controllers and spoiled and entitled, like we talked about, and it ruins their lives and their relationships. I get to deal with them when they're in their 20s and 30s, and in all of their omniscience, when they've made all of their decisions about dating and who to be with and so on, and nobody's given them any life lessons, they discover that, I'll be darned, their partner doesn't like to be controlled every second. Who would have thought? So what you're teaching your daughter is just miraculously cool. New subject. I know a husband who is controlling, angry, one of the most completely selfish human beings I've run into. This was the guy that I talked about once before, many chats ago, who yelled at his wife because she was so selfish that when she went to bed, they would both go to bed at the same time, she needed the lights off and wanted him to stop blaring his music and his new news programs right next to her ear. He yelled at her because she was so selfish as to not give him what he wanted. I didn't put these two together intentionally, but this is exactly what I was just talking about with little Zoe. If Zoe isn't taught by her mother that sometimes you don't get everything that you want, you don't get to control everything, they grow up to be this guy. No kidding. Apparently, when he was a child, I learned, and he wanted something, he manipulated and had a fit and whatever until he got what he wanted. So here he is sleeping with his own wife, playing music, listening to music programs with the light on and yelling at her that she would like to have it dark and quiet. Interesting. Every sleep expert in the world, when you talk about if you're having trouble sleeping, asks you if you have access to an environment that is dark and quiet for sleep. All of them. And here's this guy with no consideration for that at all. If he's not a narcissistic personality disorder, I'll eat my shoes. He's never wrong. He interferes with raising the children the entire time he's at home. Now, he doesn't mind her raising the kids when he's not at home, because when he's not at home, he's completely immersed in himself. The only person he has to worry about or think about or satisfy is him. When he goes home, he interferes with the way she raises the kids. Why? Because he thinks it will be better for them? No, because he's not getting something he wants. And if the kids get in the way, heaven help her. So she has to deal with the kids' confusion and their sense of entitlement all day long while he's at work, because that's the example he set when he's home. A complete F as a spouse. I don't know why I'm going on and on about this, but there are some spouses that are utterly impossible. Like I said, he's never been wrong, so he never learns anything, and he only thinks of himself. On one occasion, he had just interfered with what she had done with the child over and over, which leaves the child going, what in the world? It would be as though we had gravity, didn't, then we do, then we don't, then we did, then we don't. What would you hang on to? Actually, what would you do? You'd have no idea what to do if gravity were intermittent. And that's what this is like for a child, to be raised by a parent who's permissive and then another parent who's trying to teach them something. So minutes later, she changed something that he had done with the kid. She didn't correct him in front of the kid. She didn't criticize him. She just loved and taught the child in the way of unconditional love. She didn't say out loud, real love says to do this. She didn't give him a lecture. She just did it. She just loved and taught the child, and he had a fit because it contradicted what he told the child, which is, you always give me what I want. That's his guiding principle in life. A thing is true if it's what he likes. A thing is good if it gives him what he wants and makes him feel better. He had a fit. If he interferes, it's because he knows everything and is right. That's why people interfere. They felt lost as kids. Either somebody contradicted and controlled them all the time as children, or somebody simply neglected them as children. And so from age birth on, there are some children who simply raise themselves. So all the rules they establish must be correct. They're the only rules they've ever known. If he interferes, he knows everything. If she interferes, she is a selfish, lunatic witch and deserves to die. This is a quote. I'm not making this up. Not exaggerating a bit. I mentioned that his behavior might be a bit selfish and critical. She responded. She said that he is selfish and hypocritical and so wanting to be loved. And I responded that it was kind of her to notice that, to remember that his insane behavior is motivated by pain rather than labeling him as bad, which helps nobody. She continues, but he's clueless how to ask for love. At least we had a moment that particular night that he was being awful, sitting together where when I touched his leg with my leg, he didn't leave the couch, which he apparently normally does. He doesn't let anybody touch him unless he asks for it. If he didn't ask for it, it's not wanted, is pretty much the rule. He's like a child who raised himself in a candy store. So to him, candy is like the only love he knows, just candy. But it's not what he needs. And he demands that you give him candy. But that's not going to create a healthy relationship. And this is something that is very common in relationships, is that one person is in so much pain that they define love as, you give me everything that I ask for. And that's not love. That's just holding somebody hostage. It's being demanding. It's being selfish. And I tell you all this just to give you a flavor of where selfishness ends up. This is where the 4-year-old kid who said, no, I wasn't controlling anybody, ends up when she's married and she's 30 and has 2 kids of her own and she's destroying everyone. But the 4-year-old kid, this isn't going to happen to that kid because mom's teaching her, which is a miracle. New subject. This is a hard one. I know a woman, Anne, who is married to a man, Charles, who got no love whatever as a child. 0. There isn't a single loving story from his childhood. He was never listened to by his parents. He learned to survive by being competent, educated, and above all, right about everything. And no, I didn't intentionally put 3 stories in a row about people being right, but here we are. Apparently, we're going to learn this lesson. It's a common situation. He is vehemently atheistic, condemns people who believe in God as idiots without realizing that, ironically, he's worshiping at the altar of science or worshiping at the... Actually, he is religious, very religious, just that the God in his world is him. Let me explain. There's nothing wrong with science. This man talks about science all day long, and he does it so he can be right, because being a trained scientist, he tends to know more about science than most people. As a freshman in college, my interest in science was so noticeable that I got a postgraduate internship to work in high-temperature, high-pressure chemistry, normally reserved for people 4 years further along in their chemistry education than I. I'm not telling you that to brag, but to tell you that I'm not mocking science. Love science. Just as a kid, I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. That there were laws that explained stuff. I probably liked it especially because in real life, there weren't laws that governed the behavior of people. People were wildly unpredictable. You mix 2 chemicals together and it's pretty predictable what's going to happen. You drop a little block of sodium in a tub of water. Sodium is a metal, by the way. It's really shiny and pretty and soft, about the consistency of really hard butter. But you throw a block of sodium in water and it explodes. Not the reaction you would anticipate from a block of metal, but it's also very impressive. And when you're a teenage kid, you do it over and over again. So, love science. Charles worships science. He doesn't just enjoy it. He has a job in it. Again, fine. I'm really glad there are people that have jobs in science, or we wouldn't be working on solar energy and all the things to make the earth cleaner. But he teaches his 4-year-old son science and math as though those subjects were a replacement for God. Now, that might be hard for some people to understand, but I've heard these conversations. He teaches the kids science as though it were a replacement for God and openly mocks God. He teaches the boy that it's all he needs to know. Teaches nothing about God, which is none of my business. Alone, that's fine. I have no religious agenda here. No parent has to teach their child about God. That's none of my business. But he teaches the kid that there is no God. The irony being that you could only know that there is no God. Pause. This is a really old philosophy argument that makes everybody in the room smile. And if you haven't been in philosophy class, then maybe you've not heard this. The only way you can know that there's no God is if you are God. Because you'd have to look everywhere in the universe to be sure there wasn't, and only God could do that. So to this man, science is the answer. And religious people are fools. And he teaches this out loud to his child and everybody else. But see, that's not true science. In true science, you're willing to learn from any source. Really, science is the gathering of information and bring it on. And you don't have preconceptions. For example, people who work in particle physics, people who work in string theory are the very people who didn't accept that simple Newtonian physics was the answer to everything, nor Einsteinian physics. And it turns out they're not. So they're right, these people who work in particle physics. Atheists, ironically, devout atheists, which is something about oxymoron, cannot be true scientists because science gathers evidence dispassionately, without prejudice. Atheists say that God is unprovable, and they use their science to say that. Wrong. God is unprovable using calipers or rulers or scales or equations. True. But that's like saying that there's no God is like saying that there are no symphonies because you can't measure them by smell. You simply can't use the usual scientific instruments to prove the existence of God. So Charles uses science in a way that it's become a religion, and the God of that religion is Charles. I have no agenda here to prove the existence of God to anyone. I am only saying, in fact, I can't prove God to you. I'm only saying that people who mock those of faith are self-deceived, not scientific, not dispassionate, and also unkind. Just as it would be unkind of me to mock those who choose not to believe in God. Reasonable, since there are so many who believe. It would be reasonable to mock those who don't, is what I'm saying, but not kind. And decided that he didn't exist. If I mocked people who made that decision, swell, decide what you want. But if someone hasn't even looked yet, if that person doesn't believe, that's just a stand of ignorance. In other words, I can't see it, so it doesn't exist. Well, the people in Spain said that the New World didn't exist, but then they funded Columbus coming over to America and went, well, I'll be darned. We were wrong. Because they hadn't investigated. And Columbus had. He had gathered enough astronomical evidence and evidence from others to prove that there just about had to be another side of the world. He wasn't just wildly guessing. So I said all this to Charles's partner, Anne, who I mentioned in the beginning, and I asked her what she wanted to do. I was just simply describing that what Charles was doing is not scientific, which I get to say because I have been trained in science. She said, well, I want to take my son to church with me for an hour a week. Hardly a heavy burden, an hour a week. Charles spends probably 6 to 8 hours a week teaching science to the kid. So not a big burden. way less time every day than Charles teaches the boy science, and I suggested that she tell Charles she would be doing that. I told you this would be a difficult one. More about the God issue. It's just a subject that deserves genuine investigation before you mock it to your children, or in Charles's case, forbid it. He actually forbade the kid to go to church. Scientists, for example, preach evolution. Many scientists do. And not all, but many scientists, most, preach evolution and mock the idea of God as a creator. But evolution is far from proven. It's a theory, and the theory has a great many holes in it. God is also worthy of being at least considered a theory, and has easily as much evidence to make it worth investigating. The tools are just different. Truth even within science. To explain phenomena, many theories or approaches must be used, like quantum physics, Newtonian physics, particle physics, string theory, the Higgs boson particle, and so on. Now, here's the problem. Normally, partners don't act unless they're in agreement. But we have Charles feeding his son propaganda against God, while Anne does nothing. Why does she do nothing? Because her husband has forbidden her to do anything. So we already have a dictatorship. We don't have a partnership. Even from a scientific point of view, that's not reasonable. The child needs to make a choice. Choice is easily the most important principle of the universe. No kidding. Even to a scientist. Which the child can't do if he's not exposed to a view other than that of his father. Everybody following this? All I'm talking about, I'm not telling anybody to believe anything. I don't care. I don't. But it does matter that we have choice. We can't be happy without choice. World wars have been fought over choice. We feel like prisoners, kind of by definition, when we don't have choice. So Anne writes to me. She said, this is really hard for me to say things to Charles that I know that he's going to hate. So listen carefully here. This is precisely why he is intimidating and selfish and arrogant and condescending about everything, not just about God, because he knows that it will make you uncomfortable to say anything to him about himself. He's manipulating you not to ever say anything about him. This isn't about God. It's about he takes personally everything he knows. If anything that he claims to know proves not to be true, his world flies apart. So he has to be right. And his intimidation of you is working. If this is, to use your words, so hard for you to talk to Charles, you're already screwed before you start. Parenthetically, I'm speaking to everybody that I'm talking to now. He intimidates her about everything. God, child rearing, household stuff. He learned as a child that the only way you could defend yourself was to be right, and he learned it from his father. Now, back to Anne. You are not consistent about stopping Charles when he's selfish and intimidating. If Charles is doing something that's not affecting you and not affecting your son, leave him alone. It's just a preference. He prefers pecan pie over chocolate pie, which is, of course, the correct choice. But you're not stopping him consistently when he's selfish and intimidating and affecting you and your child. So you get to speak. And until you're consistent, he'll keep doing it. He loves intimidating you. You may forget, I know him. Yes, he does most of this unconsciously, but he loves to shut your mouth with his reasoning, with his overpowering you, and you let him. You continue. I feel like I'm throwing myself off a cliff with my eyes closed or something every time I go to talk to him about new things. And I feel like hitting myself on the head with a hammer when I keep addressing the same issue about Charles, because you're not hearing it. You're not consistent with him because you're afraid of him. And we've talked about Charles over and over and over, and it's hurting you and it's hurting your son. You continue. I'm too blind to see anything good come out of this right now, and I just anticipate falling to the ground and killing myself. Well, I'm not laughing at the idea of you killing yourself, but I am laughing at the problem here, which is that you keep complaining about a thing that you keep then not addressing. So you keep saying, he does this, he does this, he does this, and I keep telling you what you could do, how you could respond, but you don't. Only once in a long while, which to him is just an accident. What's the bottom line on this arguing about God thing? Charles already has set up his own church, the Church of Science, and he's the God of the Church of Science. You get to, most of the time, you do things in concert as a couple. He's chosen to do this thing whether you want to do it or not. So it's really important that your son has a choice. So that hour you go to church every week, take him and you tell Charles that's what you're going to do. You tell him that you have a right to teach him your choice, just like he has a right to teach him his. And then the kid can make his own. But you don't do this angrily, and you don't do it afraid. You cannot be afraid when you talk about this. You can't be a slave to Charles's anger anymore. That's actually the most important point we've talked about so far, other than the fact that your child needs to have a choice. Everybody does. You can't be happy without choice. This is about a lot of things. You're being consistent with him. Second, email. All of this has been the first. Well, and me butting in with my own thoughts here and there. She writes and says, okay, I do see that it's the same issue every time with me and Charles. Good for you. So what I hear you say is that the reason Charles continues to treat me the way he does, which is to just dismiss my opinion, is because I have let him. Yes, that's exactly right. Do you have any doubt in your mind that Charles would speak with intimidation and insist on being right and be intransigent and difficult and stubborn and snotty and condescend? You think he'd do that with me? I promise you, without this subject being brought up with him, he wouldn't. Why? He knows I wouldn't let him. He also knows that I know the other side of the argument. But you do let him. If you didn't let him, he'd stop. Every time you don't stop him, now everybody that I'm talking to here, listen, because even though the issue may not be about teaching the option of God to a kid, this is a really common refrain. That one partner says, my partner constantly insists on being right, and I'm telling all of you, it's because you let it happen. Back to Anne. Every time you don't stop him, boy, memorize this. See, if you stop him occasionally when he's being right and intimidating and snotty and condescending, he doesn't even notice. Every time you don't stop him, you're actually giving him permission to keep doing it. People who feel abused and controlled and miserable because of a parent or a spouse or whatever, you allow it to happen. Now, admittedly, most people don't have either the knowledge or the love or the power to stop it. But Anne does. And so I'm talking to her way more directly than I would talk to somebody the first time, because we've talked about this subject 100 times easily. And she continues, and that I can't complain about how he treats me or act victimized by it because I haven't done what it takes to stop it. Again, long sigh. Right. You continue. I thought I had been consistent in pointing out his selfishness, particularly with the kids, but I can't have been consistent since he keeps believing there's a chance I'll back down if he intimidates me. Now I want to loudly say, yes. And I want to say this to everybody who's listening. People will tell me I have an intimidating, controlling partner, often the husband, but not always, who's just right, and condescending and speaks to me in a snotty way. Let me tell you, kid, if you stop that every single time it happened, and you can learn how to stop that by reading the victim book, the PCSD book, by watching all the video chats. If you stop it, if you point out to your partner what they're doing every time, calmly, firmly, without fear, they wouldn't continue. And if they are doing it, it means you're not doing it consistently. How do I know this? How can I possibly know your life while you're sitting there and I've never met you and you're watching a video chat for the first time? Because I know people. Because the reason we do things is because we get something from it. Really. Why do kids eat candy? Because it's nutritious? Because they like it. Why do some people lie? Why do people steal? Why do some people hit other people? Why do they shoot each other? Because they get something from it. Power, pleasure, whatever. So you can write it down that if he keeps doing this, you're not being consistent. You continue. You're saying that if I really didn't let him get away with anything, that's one way to see it, he would stop. Yes, mostly. He would either, one, stop intimidating you, or, and this is a distinct second possibility, blow up and tell you that he'll never stop. That's what narcissistic personality disorder people do. They can't give up. They can't give up being right, because if they gave up being right, they would cease to be, really. They would die. They have to be right. Being right is like blood in their veins. It's like air in their lungs. So he'll either stop and you two will start having reasonable conversations, or he'll blow up and tell you, man, tough, too bad, I'm always going to do this. And he'll continue to be a bully with you and your kids for the rest of your lives. Would you want to stay with somebody who's going to do that? Bully you and your kids for the rest of their lives? Can't imagine that. So either way, if you can consistently stop him, by stop him, I don't mean but punch him in the face. I mean point out that he's doing it. Stop him in the middle of doing it and say, this is what you're doing. You can't lose, because either he becomes a real partner or you finally know that he never will. I'm going to underline that because, boy, there's a lot of people out there wondering what to do in their partnerships. If you speak the truth, if you insist that you cannot be treated in an unloving way, you win. Because either your partner will become a partner, a real one, or you'll finally know that it's never going to happen. And then you got to decide whether you're satisfied with that. Whether you're satisfied with being a slave, or you'd rather be free. And I can't make that decision for you. Some people insanely are satisfied with slavery. Not kidding. She concludes, he hasn't stopped, so that's on me. So I need to be more consistent in telling him the things that he doesn't want to hear fearlessly. Otherwise, nothing changes. I think I'll start tonight. Forgive me, but we'll see. How is what I've been describing loving? Because right now, he won't accept love. He'd rather be right. He has so little familiarity with unconditional love that being right is what keeps him alive. No joke. It's the only thing he's got to protect himself or to feel worthwhile. And she's tried. I've seen it. She's tried over and over. And his being right and angry is hurting him. It's hurting her. It's hurting their marriage, and it's hurting their son. It has to stop, either by her telling him every time he does it, which is likely to stop it, or by her leaving. One of the two. But it can't continue like this. So the most loving thing for her, for him, for the marriage, for their son, is to be consistent. Now, parenthetically, and I wish this were always true, but it's not. When she said, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be more consistent, and I'll start tonight. She did. She did. She started right then. And she did it consistently. Now, in the beginning, remember I said there were two possibilities that could happen. He'd either stop or he'd blow up. Well, he blew up. What did she do? She kept consistently pointing out every time he said something snotty, controlling, angry, unloving, and so on, toward her or toward the children. She didn't yell at him. She didn't say he shouldn't. She didn't say he was a bad person. She just said she would take him into the next room and say, you just said blank to our son. And there's no child in the world who would not be hurt by that. So it's hurtful to him. And I just want to tell you that that's what you did. Or if he's speaking to her in the same room, well, then she stops him right then. She takes him into the next room only so she doesn't correct him in front of the child. So initially he blew up and said he was right. And then amazingly, he actually read some real love books. He actually started learning some stuff. He actually started asking some wise men if maybe, well, initially, of course, he asked the wise people to confirm that he was right. But when they told him that he wasn't, over and over and over, he began to entertain the possibility that he was actually hurting his family. And for now, at least, his behavior, the selfish behavior toward his wife and toward his child, has improved dramatically, to the point where they shed tears together. They speak lovingly to each other. They talk about ways that they can raise their son in a more loving environment. This is a miracle. It's a miracle just when one person changes their perspective and therefore their judgment, feeling, and reactions for the rest of their life. Apparently, didn't make my phone silent. It's a miracle when one person does it. When that person then teaches it in a calm and loving way to their partner, in a way where they can actually become real partners, not just in name. That's a double miracle. It's an amazing thing to see. It can be done. Anne just proved it. And you can read all about it in the parenting book, the marriage book, the PCSD book, the victim book. There are many examples of people who have done this. Real love works. This lady, Anne, asked herself, what will happen? How will the world change if I bring love to this situation instead of pain or hurt or fear? And it's changed her world and changed the world of her family. If she can do it, so can we. I'll see you in a week.